Yes, that's right. It's Joe here, live from the Wildwind workshop with some more Q&A on Joyrider TV. Yeah, so the idea with this session is you guys are going to ask the questions and I am going to see if I can come through with some satisfactory answers. I'm sure that I can. I'm coming to you from the Wildwind Sailing Holidays workshop. Wildwind Sailing Holidays is based in Greece on the island of Lefkos, and we have closed for the season, but I've been working here teaching catamaran sailing for a long time. So if you are new to Joyrider TV, this is a great place to get some information about catamaran sailing amongst other things, because that is very much what we do. All right, we've got Leland Lee on board. Greetings from Clearwater, Florida. Glad you can make it, Lee. And hello to everybody else who is just tuning in at the moment. Yeah, so what is cooking on the Wildwind Beach? Well, I can tell you most exciting thing from this week has probably been that every year I have to put in quite a significant order for spare parts with Hobie Cat Europe. We've got about 30 Hobie Cats on the beach and they all need stuff. And this year, the spare parts order has been pretty significant in that we're replacing several masts. Now, masts are expensive. That is the truth. And in fact, if you were going to buy a boat by buying all the individual parts, it would cost you a lot more than actually just buying a boat. But the we're getting 3 new Tiger masts and 3 new Pacific masts. So very exciting to be getting our hands on those bad boys. As well as the masts, what else is on the shopping list? Most significant things are I have ordered some new suits of Tortola sails for 16s. So next year we will be seeing a new colour. But the most exciting thing that is happening on the Wildwind Beach from the order that has gone in is we're having four pretty much brand new Hobie 16s arriving next year, which are boats which will be from the World Championships, which were this year in Spain. So they'll have just had 2 or so weeks use, and then we get our hands on them. Hopefully those will be arriving at some point in the winter, and when they arrive, what I'm going to do is build one of them so that we can go through the building process, but building a boat out of the box. I think that is exciting. Oh, I hope we've got Ryan on board. Nice to have you on board, Ryan, from Maui. Ryan there showing off the new custom emojis for anybody who is a channel member on Joyrider TV. Very nice. All right. Leland says, can you talk about quick release pins, where they may work and where they may not? Yeah, I think we can do that. All right, so just one. Now, I don't actually think that we've got any quick release pins, but just to sort of explain what they are to those who don't know, a quick release pin would be like where you have a clevis pin like this, that perhaps it's one of the pins that holds the mast up, perhaps it's a pin that holds the main sheet on, or so on. Now, a quick release pin would be one like this, but rather than having a hole in the end, it will have a small ball on each side, and you pull a piece on the end, which pulls the balls inwards, slides it in, and then those balls stop it from coming out. Now, where would you use one of those on the sort of boats which we are talking about? It's all, I think for me, it's all about peace of mind, because there is something quite reassuring about having a pin with a ring in the end like this, because, you know, especially when you get some tape on it as well, you know that that bad boy is not coming out, not unless you want it to. Now, with the quick release pins, I would feel a little bit nervous using them, but they do use them on a lot of performance monohulls, especially where you might be changing the rig settings between races and you want to be able to just pop the pin out. A lot of them have a button on the end that you push, and that brings the balls in so you can get it out. So you push it, push the button on the end, pull the pin out, change your setting, put it back in, and off you go. So that would suggest that you can rely on them. So I would say the only place where they're really going to be useful would be on the shrouds. And I would say only really on the shrouds on a boat like an F-18, where if you're going to competition and the wind changes significantly between races. So, for example, if the wind picks up a load between races, then you could tighten the rig up one hole on the stay adjuster. So the way you'd go about this is you'd have to sail along. Crew goes to the leeward side of the boat, because the leeward side, of course, the shroud on that side doesn't have any tension in it. So if we just draw a quick picture here. So if the sail's over that side, so the pressure is blowing the rig that way. So the shroud on the windward side would be very tight indeed, because that is taking all of the pressure, whereas the shroud on the leeward side would be loose. So the shroud on the leeward side, you just move it down one hole if the wind has significantly increased. And then once that's in, you tack and do the same procedure on the other side. But in catamaran sailing, it's not so much the done thing to change the rig tension on the F-18s between races. Instead, what you might do is change the tension in the diamond wires, putting more pre-bend into the mast if the wind increases. Yes, you're putting the mast up and down a lot. That would be another time when they might be useful. So, but generally, I would stick to the normal ones. To cut that story to the end, I would say stick to the normal ones, unless you do want to be adjusting your settings out on the water. Okay, hello to everybody who's tuning in. All right, we got Mr. Tony KP from Ebeltoft, Denmark. Aha, very nice. All right, we've got Toot on board. Hello, Toot. Toot is enjoying a bit of cold weather, and it's raining in Texas. All right, we've got Scott on board, dropping it in the slot. Good morning to all of the Joyrider community. Great to have you on board. Chris is there in Texas as well. Hello, Chris. Nice to have you with us as always. All right, Toot says, here we go. I have a problem with a furling jib when there's load on the sail, have to head up to furl. Help. All right. Yeah, furling jibs, they can be quite tricky sometimes, especially if it's windy. So let's just see if I've got a crikey, it's dark in here, I tell you. here we go. Because we're in the workshop, it's nice to show a few things. But this is actually a broken or not complete furling drum. So basically, with the furler on the boat, what you'd have is, it's not the same for all boats, but generally what you'd have is the forestay attaches here. At the top of the forestay, you'd have a swivel so that the forestay can rotate, and then you'd attach the tack of the jib to the lower down hole on the chain plate that goes in here, and then you have a rope that goes into the furler here, and then when you want to roll the jib, you just pull the rope and it rolls very easily. That is the vibe. But sometimes it's not easy, especially when it's windy. So the technique that really works the best with a furling jib is, let's say we've got onshore wind and here's the beach. You want to come in, but you want to roll the jib before you get in. Then the easiest way to roll a jib on a catamaran, if we're sailing along like this, is at the time when we want to roll the jib, put the boat pretty much dead downwind. Because what that does is that takes all of the pressure out of the sail. If you try to roll the jib when it's windy with the boat pointing more upwind, as soon as you let the jib sheet off, which you have to do to roll the jib, then the sail's going to start flogging like a witch, and it's really not going to want to furl. Whereas if you put the boat downwind, there's two things that happen there. One is the mainsail. If we can see here, the mainsail puts the jib into a wind shadow, so there's no wind in the jib. The apparent wind also takes the pressure out of the jib. Also, what is happening here is when the wind is blowing from behind, the pressure in the rig, if there's the mast, because the rig's getting blown forwards, all of the pressure in the rig is going into the shrouds and coming off the forestay, and all of these ingredients make it much easier to roll the jib when you're going downwind, but not on a broad reach, actually going pretty much on a dead run straight in line with the wind. That would be my recommendation there for rolling the jib. Thanks for the question there too. I hope that helps. But if it's windy, heading up, I would say, is going to make for a more flappy jib experience. And the worst thing with the furling jib is, if you have furled the jib while the jib's been flapping, so here's the boat, here's the mast, and here's our furled jib. What happens if it's been flapping while you've been rolling the jib is you'll get a bit of sail escape up at the top where it hasn't furled very nicely. Then that will catch the wind and that will start flogging, especially if the boat's sailing upwind or stopped. And then before you know it, the whole thing is a flogging mess. So really turn the boat downwind. There we go. That is what I think. All right. We've got David on board in Dallas. Hello, David. We've got, yeah, as Toot says, 3 Texans in the room. We've got RJ Fleet on board. Hello. Lake Benton, Minnesota. A little bit of snow flurries today. All right. Dear, oh dear. Aaron's on board in New Zealand. Thanks for joining us, Aaron. Must be pretty late where you are. Oh, or is it actually tomorrow already? Arno is there in Canada. He's got a question. Here we go. What do you use for your in-water moorings? I was thinking of making one with an old tire filled up with concrete. And I think you've just answered the question. Yeah, that is exactly what we use. I think the thing to consider is, what is your seabed like? If your seabed is a rocky one, then you really want something that's going to penetrate a bit. I can't think of what is going to be ideal off the top of my head. But yeah, what we use is a car tire, which is filled with concrete. And then there's two ways that we've been attaching the rope to this contraption. One is the older way that we've been doing it is when we pour the concrete into the tire, we have a piece of chain that goes in, and then what we do is to make sure that it's not just the concrete holding the chain, we actually put a piece of bar inside the tire that goes all the way through, and the chain that goes through the chain as well, kind of like that inside the tire. And then this piece of bar is longer than the opening of the tire. So if the extremely unlikely that would ever pull through the concrete unless your mix is really bad, but if it did pull up, it wouldn't pull out all the way because the actual tire itself would stop it from coming out. So then we have some chain on the end, and then from there we'd attach something like 2.5 times the depth of the water with the rope. I'm sure that anybody who knows about kind of big boat stuff would be able to say exactly how much rope you should have for the depth of the water. And then we have a carabiner clip on the end. That's my picture of a carabiner clip. And then before the carabiner clip, we have a buoy like that. There we go. That is how we're doing it. What I have seen done is, rather than using the tire to set the mooring, is to actually use an old lorry wheel, the metal part of the wheel without a tire, because then the shape of the wheel like this, filling this with concrete, then the actual shape of the wheel, this is more likely to dig in to the ground than the tire. So where the seabed isn't, like here we've got sandy seabed, which means over time, like in about a week, 2 weeks, the sand will actually start to cover the tire. Lovely. But if your seabed isn't going to allow that, then using a wheel is going to actually naturally dig in a little bit more. There we go. All right, Chris says something to ponder on the furling jib is what equipment is being used, Harken or Ronstan. Oh, we're talking brands here. Harken, of course, from America. Ronstan, I believe, from Australia. Ronstan swivels on top tend to bind, while Harken doesn't. Ronstan is much stronger then. There we go. So yeah, that is another element with the furling jib, is check your tackle. No, I'm not going to go and grab a swivel. I'm not going to do that. But check your tackle. When your mast's down, just check your swivels. Make sure they do turn as they should. If there's a sort of grinding kind of feeling when you're trying to turn it, then it's probably time to replace that swivel. All right, Lee's on board. He says, hello, Joe, and the Joyriders from Myrtle Beach, SC. Where would that be? Answers on a postcard. spending time with my dad. Veterans Day here in the US. Yeah, it is the same in the UK as well. So tip of the hat to all veterans out there. All right, Toot says his swivel is a Harken. He also says happy birthday, US Marines, yesterday. All right. We also have on board Jamie Bravo from Oregon, the Oregon coast. Great to have you with us. All right. David says, I'm curious, what's the coldest conditions you've ever sailed a cat? Yeah, it's actually before I started working here in Greece, when I was a teenager, not that I can remember that particularly well now. I lived on the east coast of England in a town called Felixstowe, which is right on the North Sea, and it doesn't get cold like it does for anybody who's a Canadian, especially. I think would say you don't know what cold is. But I used to have a Dart 18, and I used to sail it every single day of the year, whatever the weather was doing. And there was one particular occasion I didn't have particularly warm gear to wear either. What I was wearing was more of a summer two-piece wetsuit, which wasn't the best for the cold conditions. And it got to the stage where I was so cold that I actually couldn't feel my feet at all. So when I was trapezing, it was a very bizarre experience. But that is the coldest I've ever sailed. I have sailed with horizontal snow, but not for a long time now. I know that the Canadians out there definitely put up with some significant cold weather. All right, Scott with a question. Where do you get your writing lines for your boats? Any thoughts on having a pocket on the underside of the trampoline to store the writing line? Yeah, I think if you're getting a custom-made trampoline, especially on a 16, where you have got a lot of, at the front of the trampoline on the 16, you've got a lot of headroom between the trampoline and the water. So I'd say putting a pocket on the underside of the trampoline would be a pretty good shout to store a capsize writing line. All that we're using for capsize writing lines is we're using 12 mil, just any 12 mil rope, and it doesn't need to be anything fancy, just a polyester rope, 12 mil, because you want something nice and thick to hold on to. But you could go thinner to like a 10 mil, which you just don't want to go too thin, because when you throw that over the top hull, then if your rope is too thin, especially if you've got two people pulling on it, there is a chance that it might damage the hull. So you do want something reasonably thick, but also something for your hands is nice. So 12 mil. And yes, I would say putting a pocket on the underside of the trampoline is a good shout to put your writing line in. And perhaps consider on that pocket having either some Velcro or a zip to keep the rope in there. Because what you don't want, of course, is the rope to escape when you don't want it to escape. Yeah, so I would say that seems like quite a good shout. All right, David says, oh yeah, SC South Carolina. Of course, now you say it, it is quite obvious. All right, we've got Frank on board in Clearwater, Florida. All right, and yeah, today I've only actually got one preloaded question, but it is a good one. So, hope you're ready for this. This one comes from Tom, and it's a spinnaker related question. And he says, what is the right amount of tension to have in the luff of the spinnaker? does the head of the sail have to be against the block at the mast? Okay, this is a fine question there, Tom. So what we have got, here's our boat, as pretty standard, the top of the boat. Here's the mast. Let's say this is the block at the top of the mast for the spinnaker. Then we've, of course, got our bowsprit and a block at the end of the bowsprit. Now, there is a fairly scientific way of doing this. So, yes, in answer to your question, the short version is, yes, we do want the head of the spinnaker to be right up against the block on the mast, because otherwise the spinnaker is going to be falling away. The head of the top part of the spinnaker is going to be falling away to leeward from the mast. So we want to have a very positive position of the luff of the spinnaker. But what is critical is and what we can adjust is actually the height of the pole. So if this is our bridle wires here, we'd have a line. Let's do a line in red. Or you might have some sort of bar or something that attaches onto your bowsprit. But it's this that you can adjust, and you can adjust the height of the spinnaker pole. So how high should you have the spinnaker pole? All right, so there's a bit of a job on here. What we need to do first is we need to measure the luff, the front edge of the spinnaker. All right, so let's say that the front edge of the spinnaker is 8 meters long. That is actually going to be pretty long, but let's say 8 meters. And then what we want is this distance here to be 10% shorter than the luff of the spinnaker, because what we don't want is to have the luff of the spinnaker absolutely bar tight. 10% of the length of the luff is the optimal amount of slack, let's call it, that we have in the luff of the spinnaker to put the shape into the spinnaker. This amount might be different with a smaller size sail. This 8 meters is more kind of tornado size. So 10% of 8 meters is going to be, if my calculations are correct, 80 centimeters, which means the distance between here and here wants to be, answer on a postcard, 7 meters 20. And then what that means is when you pull the spinnaker up, you want to have the tack right against the block there and the head right against the block there. And then you know that all you have to do is crank it up as hard as you can, and it's going to be in the right position. That is how tight that should be. There we go. If the wind is super light and you want to go really deep, you can ease a little bit of halyard as well. And what that will do is, like I was saying before, the head of the spinnaker is actually going to fall away to leeward. But what it's also going to do is put more fullness into the spinnaker, making it more powerful and better for sailing deeper downwind. So there you go. Hope that helps. All right. So we got Ryan, who says we put some knots in our writing line, but no bottom pocket. It's hard to stuff it in the top. Oh, it's hard enough to stuff it in the top pocket. Actually, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. So we're back to the writing line pocket on the underside of the trampoline kind of vibe. Now, when you've got your boat back upright, getting the righting line into the pocket on the top of the trampoline, you know, that's pretty easy to do. But how difficult would it be to stuff the righting line into the pocket on the underside of the trampoline? Something worth considering before getting that pocket fitted to the other side. Yeah. So yeah, it's got to be your decision there, Scott. Now on one of our tornadoes here, we've actually got a pocket on the underside of the trampoline where the righting line lives. And the reason that on the tornado that seems like a good idea is because it's much less likely to capsize a tornado because the boat is so much bigger. You've got so much more time when it is starting to go to do something about it and stop it from capsizing. Whereas with a 16, where you're going to capsize more frequently, you might be shoving your arm under the front beam more often. But worth having a try to see how that looks. There we go. All right, so unless anybody's got any further questions, that is all that we've got for today. I know, what a shocker. So I did actually prepare something just in case we ran out of steam at about 31 minutes. And that is the question of leaky boat. Does your boat take in water after going for a sail, even in light winds? If it does, then one place where your boat may well be leaking is through the bung or the bung housing. Now, the reason this is the most likely is because the bung is constantly under the water, which means that is the place where the water is most likely to be getting in, unless you have got some sort of a crack in the hull, like if your boat's got centerboards or something, then water might be getting in from around that area. But if you sail something like a Prindle 16, let's give the Prindles a nod. I don't even know if Prindles have bungs in the back, but if they did, then the bung would constantly be under the water. So that is the most likely place where the boat would be leaking. So the one thing with your bungs is you need to keep the thread on the bung clean. So when you take your bung out, it is, especially if you sail from a sandy beach, make sure there's not bits of sand either on the thread of the bung or inside the thread in the bung housing. So that is number one, keep your bung threads clean. And then what you're going to need also to prevent the boat from leaking is a seal. It'll be a rubber ring like this that goes over the bung, and that is actually what creates the seal. Yeah, can't really see it that well. That creates the seal, so worth a look there. Now, does anybody actually put any grease or anything, or maybe a bit of Vaseline on the thread of the bungs? That might help to seal it even better. So if your boat is taking in water, that could be a factor. If your boat has hatches, so if it's like Hobie Tiger style or Hobie 20 with the hatches on the deck where you bolt the boat together, then if you are shipping water over the sides quite a lot because it's windy or big waves, or if you capsize and then that hull has a lot of water in, then that is a sign that it's actually the hatch that's been leaking if there is a lot of water in one hull after the boat's been capsized and that was the hull which was in the water. So the hatches, like with the bungs, should have a rubber seal on them. So make sure they've got a rubber seal, and it is a job periodically worth doing maybe once every 4 years in the real world, maybe a bit more, is to actually remove the ring for the hatch from the hull. It's just a case of taking some screws out, take the hatch out, and then take off the old sealant. So there should be sealant that goes around, put some new sealant on and put the hatch back on. Better still, put on some new hatches. I think they'd probably cost about $15 each. And when you buy a new hatch, you get a new ring for the hatch as well. So that is going to give you that peace of mind that you're doing everything you can stop your boat from leaking. There we go. There's just a few nuggets about leaky boats. All right. So scrolling back. Chris says with the writing line storage chat is you can get from Murray's. If you use the code at the checkout Joyrider, you get a free t-shirt. There we go. They do some clip-on trampoline pockets. And with those pockets, they're like little bags. You clip them onto the trampoline lacing, and you could either put it on the top or the bottom, depending on how you fancy it. All right, David says, I only ever sailed small monohulls, but I've always been curious about smaller 16 to 18 foot catamarans. What are your thoughts on transitioning from monos to small cats? Yeah, so it is definitely the easier way to go to make the transition from a monohull to a catamaran, because the biggest thing that makes catamaran sailing easier is with the two hulls, you've got this stability. If you put your weight in the wrong place on the boat, you're going to end up in the water with the boat capsized. So getting onto a catamaran from a monohull is a fairly easy transition. The bit that makes it, so that's what makes it easier. The bit that makes it a bit more difficult is the catamarans, because you've got two hulls, they are more prone to stalling, and they're more difficult to tack, but they're not actually more difficult to tack. What it is they require more technique to tack rather than a monohull where you can just push the tiller away, the boat will tack. But then with tacking a monohull, you've then got your foot placements when you're crossing the boat to consider, to make sure that you don't unbalance the boat while you're moving across. Whereas with a catamaran, you can be a little bit more heavy-handed as you cross the boat. So it is quite an easy transition to make. The bit that I found that monohull sailors find the most intimidating about the catamaran is the speed. Now, catamarans are